welcome everyone, and thank you for being here. Wish we were in Topeka. Seems that I don't think we're ever going to meet in Topeka. Seems something always seems to come up and interfere with it. The bad weather the last few days has certainly caused us. Many of you are, obviously not in school, but thanks for joining us today. Well, as we go into today's meeting, this is a day when I would have really preferred us to be in person and had the opportunity to interact more on as we make these subcommittee reports. That's pretty much what we're really about today. But before we do that, we do have Scott Gordon and Craig Neuenswander that are going to report to us about the legislative and legal issues relative to our work and with graduation requirements. I'm looking forward to their presentations. We'll also be talking later about stakeholder outreach that we're working on. And Jared, do you have any comments as we start?
I think the only thing is I'll be manning the chat today. So as Craig and Scott are talking, and if you guys have questions, I'll be monitoring that, and then we can follow up with questions. And that through each presentation too. Through each subcommittee presentation, I'll be monitoring the chats, and we'll make sure we have those questions to discuss after those.
Great, thank you very much. And I guess we're ready to get started here. We've got a big day in front of us. Let's see, I think Scott's online. Scott, are you available?
Sure, I'm here.
Okay, are you ready to go?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you're on. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Scott Gordon. I'm General Counsel for the State Department of Education. My office has always been in charge of pushing regulations through that are adopted by the State Board of Education. Jim had asked me to kind of briefly summarize for each of you what the process is to get a regulation adopted and maybe address some concerns there may be about legislative hurdles if there are any. So there's really three things that I want to talk about. I don't have a fancy formal presentation. The process to adopt the regulations. There's a couple of statutes in place that I think you ought to be aware of. And third, maybe some recommendations, because this will probably be the only opportunity I'll have to tell you ahead of time. Kind of warn you of some pitfalls that have happened in the past whenever the task force brings something to the state board that if you don't do this, it makes the process much easier. So as you all know, the state board has regulations in place as part of accreditation that requires schools to have a minimum of 21 hours for someone to graduate from high school. And those hours are broken up, and I don't have them memorized, but they're broken up into the different subjects. To get that part of the regulation changed, it's really kind of a four-step process. The first step is that the state board will authorize the agency to put forward an actual set of regulations to be formally adopted. It's kind of a pre-vote, if you will. We take that language, it goes to the Division of Budget to ensure that it's not going to cost the state too much money. Fortunately, none of the regulations that have ever been adopted by the state board ever reached that $1 million threshold that the Division of Budget looks for. The next step is the Department of Administration, which ensures that the language that we use in the regulations is appropriate for regulations. And those of you that have never been a part of this process, congratulations. It is a long, painful experience. Anybody that's worked for the agency and for the past 10 years knows that I love it a great deal. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this set of regulations being changed. It can be a long process, but it doesn't have to be. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. So once we get the language approved from the Department of Administration, then we take them to the Office of the Attorney General, where attorneys in that office will review the proposed regulations to ensure, are the regulations within the constitutional authority of the State Board of Education? Do the regulations actually, is there a risk of the regulation not being clear because they don't want to have to defend an arbitrary or capricious regulation? And most importantly, is there anything within the proposed regulation that contradicts any other body of state law? If there is a statute in place, the state board will not be able to adopt a regulation contrary to that particular statute. And I will tell you that if there's ever a change, and by change, I mean it could be a word, change at any point in that process, we start back at the second stop, have it restamped by the Division of Budget, have it restamped by the Department of Administration. So we try to get all those changes made at one time. That never happens, but we try, right? Once we finally get everything stamped by all of those offices, then we will set it up for a public hearing period. It's about 60 days. During that time, the state board receives public comments. There is a hearing before the Kansas Joint Rules on Administrative Rules and Regulations for the state legislature to kind of look at the proposed regs to make sure they don't have any concerns. We've never had a regulation in the past 10 years not go through because of that review. We just like to kind of inform them of what the state board is doing. And then the State Board of Education will conduct a hearing. Generally, the hearing takes place on the Tuesday, where public comment is available. That following day, the agency may provide a response to any of the comments that may have been heard or that have been sent electronically, and the board formally votes to adopt them on the Wednesday. And then about 25 days later, those regulations become law. So that is the Reader's Digest version of the process of what it takes to change the graduation requirements. And if you are going to change any of the requirements, that's what we're going to have to do. And it's fine. Some things you have to look at whenever you're considering changing the regulations. There's a couple of statutes, and I've reviewed all of Chapter 72. And really, there are only two specific statutes that I've found that impose a specific graduation requirement, meaning that a student must pass something in order to receive a diploma in Kansas. And I won't bother, if you want the citations, I can give them to you later on, but no one cares. Really, there is a requirement that all accredited high schools must provide a course in civil government, U.S. history, patriotism, the civic duties along that line that is required in elementary school. No requirement that you pass the class in elementary school. It just has to be offered. There has to be certain little subjects included. Once you get to high school, those same subjects are required, but it must include a discussion of the U.S. Constitution. Now, the statute doesn't say how that class is set up, doesn't tell you the name of the class. Most schools, my understanding is, those topics are kind of rolled into your U.S. history, or if you have a civics course, that's how it's covered, right? If the student does not pass that class, whatever it may be, they shall not be certified as having completed the course requirements needed for graduation from high school. And it's my understanding that it's very simple. If you want to graduate from a high school in Kansas, whatever is designated as that class, the student must pass it. Another statute requires the state board to provide for a course in instruction in Kansas history and government, which shall be required for all students graduating from an accredited high school. And again, I'm assuming, it's my understanding that that's often the same exact class we just talked about. There are other requirements that are discussed in statute as far as the district has to make the class available. You're all familiar with the Rose capacities. There's a specific statute that was adopted a few years ago that requires accredited schools to at least offer those courses which meet the Rose capacities, right? But there's no actual requirement that a student get a certain grade, or they take a certain test, or that they pass specific classes related to those capacities. So I would not call that a graduation requirement. And there's a statute on the Celebrate Freedom Week. It just requires the state board to promote it and make information and curriculum available. Again, you don't have to pass anything specific to Celebrate Freedom Week. And there is an element in statute regarding personal financial literacy. It says the state board shall incorporate questions regarding personal finance into the math or social studies state assessments. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what they sent. Essentially, that's what the statute references. But again, there's no specific score that's required. There's no passing status for financial literacy that's required as a graduation requirement. So why do I bring all this up? Long and short of it is, as you are considering changing the graduation requirements, you can't do anything to do away with the requirement of a course and area of instruction regarding civil government, U.S. history, patriotism. That will be a graduation requirement so long as that is in statute. The Attorney General's office, I can tell you, will not allow a set of regulations going through that doesn't somehow, so at least I can explain to them where that requirement is going to be met. And so probably the last thing that I would cover is a recommendation and kind of a request. And I've shared this with Jim and other board members through the years. Before a task force takes anything to the State Board of Education along the lines of this task force recommends, the regulation says X, Y, and Z, please let me see that before you have the State Board of Education vote on that. And I will just give you my honest assessment as to whether or not there's even a chance or a reason to submit that kind of language through the adoption process. I'd really hate for you all to waste 6 to 7 months trying to get one particular sentence or one definition through if I know darn good and well it's never going to make it through as a regulation. And 9 times out of 10, whenever that occurs, my recommendation is if you're set on a specific definition, then that is something that the state board may adopt through guidance or through policy or their standards. That doesn't necessarily have to be within regulation. So Jim, you had asked me what are the legislative hurdles that the state board has to go through to adopt the regulations. That's really all I can think of. Constitutionally, the state board has the authority to set whatever graduation requirements it wants to set. And I think that's pretty firmly within their wheelhouse. That's it. Those are my 2 minutes. Unless there's any questions, I don't see any in the chat, but others may have brought up, may have some. Or Craig, if you have any, this is when Craig steps in and says, no, Scott's wrong. This is how it really works.
I would tell you, Craig was a superintendent long enough to know I don't argue with attorneys. Losing proposition. I would. The only thing I intended to add, question was also asked, what might the legislature do in terms of requirements for graduation? And many of you probably know, periodically something will come up across through the legislature that they would like to require this course or that course for graduation. Recently, we've seen the required civics exam. We've seen personal financial literacy. This year, it's computer science. To date, they've always kind of agreed that maybe there's a different way to handle that rather than making it a graduation requirement. And if you haven't had an opportunity to follow House Bill 2466 this year, that's the bill that would require computer science. The chair of the House Ed Committee has already indicated he will pull the graduation requirement from that bill. So school districts would have to provide a course, but it would not be required for graduation. I think we can count on the fact that periodically some kind of a course is going to come up and somebody will think that's something we ought to have required for graduation. But to date, they have always been willing to work with the state board and find other ways to provide that instruction and that information rather than tacking it on to a graduation requirement. Other than that, I don't have anything to add to what Scott had to say, but would be happy to answer questions as they pop up in the chat.
Any questions? Jared, any questions in the chat? Am I still here?
Yep, you're here.
There's no questions. Sorry,
No.
I'm shaking my head here.
So actually, there's not a lot written, but there is certainly the required issues relative to citizenship and constitution and history, as you said, and then you add the Rose capacities, which are, heartily recommended. But generally speaking, there's not really much specificity in the legislation and going forward as we now have it. Would that be an accurate statement?
I think that's very accurate. And I would say that it's very beneficial, in my opinion. I don't speak on behalf of the state board, obviously. And I'll use the issue that Craig just brought up. If the legislature adopts something and they can adopt it in a way to where the state board has the authority and the ability to kind of get into the nitty-gritty details of it, then you probably will not have any problems with it, right? I mean, it's much easier to adopt that into a graduation requirement. But no, Jim, you're right. There's, even with that particular statute, and if you want it, it's KSA 72-3217. You've all been dealing with that statute for years. It's been around longer than I've been with the agency. And I wouldn't anticipate any of your proposed changes would want to do away with that anyway, right? So yeah, and Jared did type it up, and that is the accurate citation in there.
Okay. But your very specific recommendation is be careful, not even changing a word. There's a lot of people that have to put their stamp on it, on any change. It's not just one body doing it, arbitrarily, moving forward. So
for what it's worth, and the reason we get a lot of pushback, because why wouldn't it be easier just to pass a statute? And if I could explain real fast, you all have seen, and if you haven't seen, just trust me, laws get pushed through very quickly without a lot of feedback, and they don't get beat up very much, and no one has any idea what the laws mean. And it's terrible for everybody. The regulations, they get beat up ahead of time before they ever become law, to where it should be fairly clear to everyone what that regulation means. So that's the benefit of doing something by regulation. And that is why we go through those proposed regulations as detailed as we possibly can before we ever take it to the state board. The cleaner the proposed regulation is before the state board formally looks at it, the faster that process is going to be to get it adopted. That much I can promise you.
I'm worried about that word faster, because we've sent some things to the Attorney General that seem to have just vanished into thin air.
So fast-ish is the best I can give you.
So we need to, whenever, when and if we ever make a recommendation, we need to make sure we know the pathway for that recommendation, and how it should be taken and moved.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. See, the board, and that's pretty, as an old government teacher, I can tell you that's pretty good. We want to make sure the regulations and laws are well thought out, and have a lot of input from different and various parts that are going to be impacted by it, especially that are within the government. So that checks and balances and processes for the good of the whole is well worth it. So we'll see what happens.
Well, if there's nothing further from me, I'll leave you all alone.
Oh, you just want to. Well, I want to thank both of you very much for joining us today and leading us in this discussion. I know it's a little disheartening to think that we could do this work and come up with some good recommendations, and they could get buried pretty quickly just in the time of moving it through. And by the time it gets through, and then there's a timeline for implementation, that it's a little disheartening, but it is also good that these kinds of things do have a process to be followed for implementation. So I'm sure that we'll be talking to you, that if there's anything that does come up for change that would take the legislature or regulation, and we'll take it from there. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Scott and Greg, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Okay, moving on. And I don't want to leave here, without saying to the group, is there, are there any questions or any comments, or what's your take on what you just heard?
Jim, I'll just add, it is good to just kind of learn the process and know, what kind of checks and balances we're going to have to be aware of as we start looking at specific language and what kind of things need to be readjusted and which kind of things don't. And so I think that was very good to hear Scott and Craig talk a little bit about that process of what that looks like moving forward.
Yeah, I don't want to discourage people, or the task force, but there are others that this is why this isn't tackled very often. So we need to, as we listen to our subcommittee reports, be in the back of our mind thinking, how do I say that if it was a change or, modification or something brand new that we're going to have to involve others at the end of the line if we make recommendations, even small ones. So again, thank you to our two resources. I appreciate them taking the time and joining us today. The next item on our agenda is the subcommittee reports. I'm pretty excited to listen to and learn what the subcommittee reports are going to be. I want to thank the subcommittees first for their hard work and efforts on this. Sometimes I know it seems like we draw it out. Other times it seems to go too fast, but we're looking forward to today. This is kind of like 7 months down in the road, and we're looking towards our May report back to the school board, the state board. But this afternoon, we're going to spend time listening to the different subcommittee reports, and that would be the courses added and deleted, mastery and competency, evaluated diplomas, and special needs students. And again, as Jared mentioned before, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and Jared will, after each presentation, go through those questions. and keep that, we'll keep doing that. And we will follow up immediately. For instance, the first one we're going to do here is courses added and deleted. Christy will be doing that, and we will ask those questions at the end of Christy's presentation. So with that, Christy, you're here for courses added and deleted. Welcome, and thank you for all your leadership and help.
Jim, if I might interrupt, were you going to send the subcommittees to about 15 minutes to prep before their presentations, or are you skipping over that?
Well, I thought we had planned to skip over that since we weren't in person.
Okay.
I might ask if the subcommittee chairs would like to do that. Certainly do that. Am I on?
Yeah, Jim, we're good. I don't think the competency and mastery subcommittee needs the time.
Well, that just put pressure on it. Way to go.
I went ahead and just took all of our notes and information and summarized it and got it something to present today on behalf of our committee.
You ready to go? Kelly? Maybe we don't have Kelly. Christy?
I'm here, Jim. Yes, I think we'd be ready to go. We're all right.
Okay. And Tricia?
Yeah, I'm fine. I don't need to meet.
Very good. That was a good question to ask before we started, but it's good that we have everybody's buy-in as we move forward. I'm getting a lot of background feed on my I don't know if somebody Okay, Christy, are you ready to go?
I am. Can everyone hear me okay?
Just the stage is yours. Thank
Okay,
you.
It looks as if I don't have great signal. I kind of in and out. So hopefully this goes well. I just put a link to a document in the chat box. So if everyone would go there so that you can pull it up and follow along with me, that would be helpful. All right, I see most people accessing the document, so I'll go ahead and get started. I will say I was a little bit intimidated after listening to the presentation just recently. This would take some changes for sure, some word changes and then some. But this is where we stand right now as a subcommittee. This is still a draft, obviously, and we were hoping to get information from you guys and let you poke holes in it, and I'll just present our ideas. The number one thing that we have discussed for at length, it seems so simple when we just write it down in a document, but is the number of credits. And we argue that both ways and talked about the pros and cons of adding courses. And ultimately, we decided to keep the number at 21, knowing that almost every district increases that and it gives them the autonomy to do so. But also it allows us the opportunity to help at-risk students or students who need to just have that minimum to make sure that they graduate and make sure we're working on getting everyone graduated in the state. The next big concept piece is we were looking at grouping units into new categories. And so you'll see there we have 4 categories: STEM, communications, society and humanities, and employability and life skills. What we have done is we've taken the minimum credits that are now required and kind of added those into each section. And then also the new addition there is adding CTE courses related to students' individual plan of study. So it's really focusing on each and every child's need for their future. So that first category is STEM. And so we moved in the 3 units of science and the 3 units of math. And then we added a unit of a CTE course that's related to that category. The next section, you see an or there because there's 2 different places that we kind of had some discussions and didn't absolutely finalize it. The options are to have the 4 units of English language arts as we now do, and then add 0.5 credit of communication, or because communications as it's written in the requirements right now is part of English language arts, it could be 3.5 units of English language arts and then 0.5 credit of communication. But that is an addition that we are looking at adding based on, we believe that's a need for all students. The next category is society and humanities. We moved in those 3 units of history and government that was just mentioned earlier. And then the thing that's changed in this category is we have the 1.5 units also in societies and humanities. Typically in the previous or current model, we have 1 unit of fine arts. This is allowing that to be a unit of fine arts in this section, but depending on the student's needs and their individual plan of study, it might also be foreign language or other related CTE courses. So this idea removes fine arts as a requirement for everyone, but then allows it for those students that it applies for. Employability and life skills. This was a big discussion item we've had in many different meetings as far as the year of physical education. We kept coming up in the data that we received about the importance and need for health-specific strategies being taught. And although that encompasses in the current plan, we wanted it to be separate so we make sure that every child has specific standards met as far as health, so they can be the best healthy person that they can be. In addition to this, we also wanted to add a half unit of personal finance. We've all discussed this many times as a large group, that we've seen that in the research also. Kids feel that they need those skills and it's not always being addressed for each and every student before they leave high school right now. And then once again, we have the related CTE courses embedded in that section as well. So as a summary, the things were added: the 0.5 communications credit, 0.5 health in place of half of the PE unit of credit that we typically have right now, the half credit of personal finance, and then adding in requiring kids to really look at CTE courses and courses that are related to their IPS to help make sure that they're prepared for their individual futures. Some other things that today was really necessary for, it's unfortunate we're not all together because we can hash this out in person, but some of the things that we discussed as a group is looking at possibly giving credit for a unit in certain areas based on mastery on a test score, whether that's an ACT or a state assessment. But this does kind of fall into some of the other subcommittees, so we need to kind of look at that as a big group. And of course, this would require a different funding formula if we're not having the same number of seat time. So that was a discussion item as well. And you've heard me say this throughout my presentation, that the IPS is like so important. It's a big part of what we're looking at. So switching to these groupings and really doing what's best for each kid would definitely require us to have some procedures in place to make sure we have trainings and accountability to make sure every district is understanding this and making sure we're doing what's best for kids. We did also discuss having a Diploma Plus option. That was not finalized. It is something we could look at and consider, and perhaps, you know, require certain numbers in each category and have that as an option, but that's not, we didn't get to that point yet. Really wanted feedback to see if that's an important step or not from you guys. And then one of the last things is there are in this plan a few extra courses left over. We were discussing whether those should be called electives or not. So for right now, they're just electives since that's what's been set in the minimum requirements right now. I talked about the ELA and PE. So then the next page, what I tried to do, because this is a lot, I guess, if you haven't been a part of our committee, is just make 3 little columns there showing you the original credits that are currently in place, and then the proposed changes and groupings, and then what that looks like for a final product. And that is it in a nutshell. I tried to make it simple. I've been trying to explain this to people that don't know what's going on and see what I'm missing, because sometimes when you're so in the weeds of everything, you talk over people's heads. So I tried to simplify it. But if are there any specific questions or anything I skipped over and didn't explain well enough?
Jared, any questions?
There are no questions in the chat. I was waiting, you know, as a teacher, that we have pretty good wait time. So if there are questions, we can wait.
Yeah, this is a lot to digest.
Yes, yes.
As people are thinking, I'm going to say, Christy, to you and your subcommittee, thank you very much. You've given us a lot to think about and to contemplate here. I think we have a question from Randy.
Thanks, Jim. So Christy, did the subcommittee, I'll just use STEM, but this would be applicable to any of the categories. So the one related CTE course, was it discussed, what if I want to take a 4th unit of math? What if I want to take AP physics as a 4th unit of science, or I want to take AP computer science in lieu of a CTE course? Would that be acceptable?
Yes, yeah, thank you for that question. There is more fluidity than maybe this kind of summary looks at, but yeah, so within that category, absolutely. The main premise here is we want students to be following their plan, what's best for them in their future. So yeah, it could be a 4th year of math or a 4th year of science. If not, we're just trying to, for the kids maybe who don't know what they want to do or have a plan, is just explore some of those courses that can kind of help them figure that out.
So it could read then one related STEM course, and the state board could identify a sample of possible courses and put some cause in there, and or other locally designed courses that would fit STEM definition, whatever your definition is. Is that kind of the direction you were thinking?
Yes, absolutely. What we need to do is just define absolute requirements. For example, like you must have 3 years of math, you must have 3 years of science, you know, and then everything else could be more flexible. So we need to work on the verbiage.
Well, I do have a question. When you say 3 math, 3 science, are we just talking about any math, any science? Or we are just like the regs are already say, you know, biological and or geometric in the math and science areas?
Right. We were discussing the same guidelines that are presented right now.
Okay. Okay.
So, yeah.
So geometric and biological and physical and, you know, yeah. Okay.
Right. And then, like I had mentioned earlier, one of the things to consider as an option is to be giving credit, a unit of credit. And that's something, like I said, it's kind of a bigger picture item that we'd all need to discuss together. If we were to award credit based on a test score, what does that look like? What unit does that replace, et cetera?
Well, we have that coming next in mastery and competency. So you've waded into their pool, and that's good.
Great.
Yeah.
Christy, again, great work with the subcommittee. I'm just asking clarifying questions. On the communications, when you talk about half a unit of communications, I assume that could be a speech course. Could it be a debate if I'm in debate? Or could it be forensics if I'm in forensics? Would that count? Or, I mean, as you guys envision it?
Yes, absolutely. We want to add as much flexibility as possible for districts to allow not only what's best for kids, but to allow options for teachers to teach that. So yeah, it could be just anything that falls into that communications category, like you mentioned, debate, communication, maybe even public speaking. If students are taking it for dual credit, that would be another option.
Okay. Very good. Still looking and thinking. Is that wait time?
Okay, Melanie, you had a question. Do you want to ask that, or do you want me to?
It. My question, Christy, was, do you have a vision for how students can go about researching to see which classes fulfill those requirements? So like Randy was just asking, you know, if I'm signing up for my classes next year as a sophomore and I want to know, well, what does fit that requirement for society and humanities? Did your group talk about what the vision looks like for how students will go about looking at those classes? So is that left up to the district? Does the district make those classifications, or how exactly does that work?
We had discussed to help, we really need to be able to provide the best way to look at it is like the colleges, you know, when they have, these are the courses you need and here are all your different options. We almost just need a guide like that that is able to be shared throughout the state of all the different options, course options to meet these different requirements. So that's going to be an important piece to put together and to make sure we share and everyone understands. Because one of the things, for example, we talked about with communications is that we might want to look at that credit falling not only under the communications grouping, but it could also perhaps fill an employability and life skills grouping. So the idea is, here's the requirements you must have, and here are all the options to meet them.
Hey, Christy, were you guys, like with your standardized test possibility that you guys were looking at covering a credit with? Like, did you guys think like with the ACT, like are there cutoff scores for, like, let's say I had a 25 in math, science, English, like all of them. Were you guys thinking the credit for each area, or like, do you guys have, what were you guys thinking with that?
There are some core content areas that are easier than others. So that's still a big discussion item. But for example, yeah, math could fairly easily, both with the ACT or our state assessment, which is a really good tool to use to say, here's a cut score that would give you a credit. again, it's somewhat similar to post-secondary education, where if you need a certain test score, they give you credit or you're allowed to take the next course.
Christy had a question from Peggy. Some options for maybe some CTE courses in ELA that you guys talked about.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember a specific, but what we were looking at was all the career clusters, you know, and trying to make sure that we are incorporating all of those. Ultimately, that would kind of help guide this. And we were just trying to make sure we had a CTE course or something related to their IPS in each one of these categories. So those need to be looked at and defined and set up for each category.
Something that came to mind for me was journalism. We might find some of the courses in the arts and AV communication career clusters, some sort of courses around those pathways.
Other comments or questions?
Yeah, Danira, did you have a question?
No, I just was suggesting that anything related to journalism could fit into that ELA type of credit.
I'll just add, if there are, and we can still get some more questions, but this is really good work by that committee. So Christy, great job. I mean, this took a lot of conversations, and I know there's still a lot of conversations to work through specifics, but great work, I will say.
Thank you. I give all the credit to my committee. I have an excellent committee, great people with great ideas.
Well, obviously, you've had some great conversations and had a lot of energy in this. This is a great, really good to think about. It's a new perspective. Yeah. Well, with that, thank you very much to you, Christy, and the subcommittee. Am I getting something? But thank you very much. There's a lot to think about, and I'm sure that we're going to tie, a lot of this is going to be tied together as we start to hear common themes, you know, but well done. Let's move on. And Ed Rains, Mastering Competency. We're ready for you to take off and tell us about Mastering Competency.
All right, outstanding. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, super. I am going to share my screen and hope that the tech is working. And once I do share my slide presentation, I'm not going to be able to see the Zoom meeting. So if there are questions as we go along, somebody's going to have to chime in and let me know. So Jared, that looks like that'd be you. All right. All right, I'm assuming all of you can see my screen now. Is that right? All right, outstanding. Okay, well, first, I need to extend a big thank you to my subcommittee. This is a group of people that I've really grown to be very fond of over the last 4 or 5 months, and we've had a lot of great discussion. Our journey has been a bit of a winding road, but I think we ended at a product that is beneficial and that hopefully will provide us some guidance. My committee, Daniel Archer, Teresa Brown, Kevin Cole, Brianna Evans, Bill Faflick, David Fernkop, Melanie, of course, Stephanie Harder, Cahill, Doug Meckel, Scott Springston, Amanda Tackett, Mark Tallman. You've all been fantastic to work with, and I certainly hope that our collaboration is ongoing beyond this particular committee. So, in developing the presentation that we're going to give you today, it was designed to be applicable to a broader audience than just the graduation task force. And so we tried to take a 30,000-foot view of this and not get into the weeds a whole lot, although we're happy to answer questions as they may come up. So, the first question that we started with in formulating recommendations was a basic question about, are we meeting the needs of all Kansas students? And we looked to the Kansas State Board of Education for guidance where that's related. And so the board's vision is that Kansas is going to lead the world in the success of each student. And they've operationalized success to mean that we have a 95% graduation rate, 75% post-secondary success rate. And of course, as many of us know, that comes from the Georgetown study that we've heard a lot about in the last year. So that was kind of our frame of reference as we looked at some data, and we began to think about how we make the arguments for doing things differently than we've always done them. I've said in this subcommittee on several occasions that the saddest epitaph on human history is we've always done it this way. And so in looking at that, I think we've come up with some recommendations that'll help each kid in the state of Kansas succeed. So as it relates to the board's vision, how are we doing? Well, in 2020, Kansas boasted the highest graduation rate ever, 88.3%. But 12% of Kansas kids did not graduate from high school in 2020. And 12% doesn't sound like a huge number until you start thinking about how many kids we're actually talking about. So in 2020, that was 4,000 to 5,000 kids. If you look at it historically over the last 10 years and you just multiply those numbers by 10, that's 40 to 50,000 students that didn't graduate. That's a lot of kids that are someone's son or daughter, someone's grandson or daughter, granddaughter, a niece and nephew. And there are real consequences for not graduating from high school. 65% of the kids in the foster care system in the state of Kansas didn't graduate. And we know that there are real consequences for not graduating, economic and otherwise. And just a couple of startling statistics to throw out there, again, looking beyond this particular group as our audience to help people understand how important it is that we get all kids across the finish line and that they are prepared for the next level. Not just that we get them across the finish line, but that they are actually ready to go on after that. 59% of the inmates in the federal prison system are high school dropouts. 75% of the inmates in state prison systems are high school dropouts. And so looking at the board's vision, the current system works for many, that 88.3%, but it does not work for all. And as we've defined it in the state of Kansas, all means each and every kid. And as many understand the current system, there's a perceived level of rigidity that precludes kind of creative approaches to meeting the needs of all kids. So one of the first things that we recommend is that the State Board of Education and KSDE clarify and provide examples of flexibility as well as criteria for personalization tools which students and families have at their disposal in an effort to improve engagement and better meet the needs of all kids. And with respect to that, let's talk about where we are now and whether or not current flexibility exists. As I said, the system as it currently exists works for a lot of kids, but it doesn't work for all kids. So currently, we've heard people say, well, we can do this right now, or we have flexibility to do things right now. But we thought it would help to clarify what the actual statutory basis for that is. And so in the administrative regulations, Article 31, it talks about units of credit. And basically it says that a full unit of credit is awarded for the successful demonstration and competency and knowledge of a content area. Doesn't say anything about seat time. And then if you look even further back to the QPA regs that were established in July of 2005, it's even more, those regs are even more specific, and it basically says that students may be awarded credit based upon the demonstrated knowledge of the content of a course or subjects, regardless of the amount of seat time. So the flexibility exists right now, I think, for us to be able to do a lot of the things that we want to do to help better meet the kids' needs. And a lot of parents don't know it. A lot of kids don't know it. Some administrators don't know it. School boards don't know it. But right now, with the regulations that I've just pointed out and that the subcommittee has studied, we can grant course credit that's not tied to seat time. We can implement competency-based approaches to better meet the needs of kids. We can personalize learning based on the student's individual plan of study. And we can accept community-based experiences in lieu of required coursework. Jared, I think later on this month, you're going to be presenting to the State Board of Education about some work that your kids have been doing with the Parks and Rec Department. And you're awarding credit over, I think, a broad variety of content areas related to that work because the kids were able to demonstrate competence. So that's an example of a community-based kind of initiative that we can currently give credit for. And as I said, really this becomes a matter of making stakeholders, parents, kids, educators, administrators, school boards understand that a little better. Now, we thought it would perhaps be helpful to contextualize this a little bit within a student profile. As we go out and talk with parent groups, or we go out and talk with student groups, or we go out and talk with legislators, or whoever the audience is, we can quote statistics all day long, but in the end, if there's not an understanding of how this hits the ground in a personal way, it won't mean anything. And so, for example, these are 3 case studies. You can probably all identify with them that we've developed. But let's just take Kyle, for example, here real quick. So Kyle comes from a working class family. His passions pertain to all things mechanical. He plans to join the family farming operation after graduation. However, Kyle's school requires that he takes language arts every year, as well as core courses, U.S. history, as a junior, government as a senior. And because of this, Kyle's individual plan of study has limited flexibility related to his interests and aspirations. So in this case, our goal for Kyle, if we're really interested in personalizing learning and making it engaging, is to lay the education foundation before he steps into the family business upon graduation. There are some other examples there that we can provide different audiences and that you can probably identify with. So it gets to the heart of what personalizing learning means. And in the state of Kansas, we've said that personalized learning places the whole child at the center of instruction. It is informed by strong relationships between educators, students, family members, community relationships to provide equity and choice in time, place, path, and demonstration of learning. And the benefits of a personalized approach that's based on a very robust, independent or individual plan of study is that it's going to promote student ownership. It's going to create lifelong learners, and it's going to increase student engagement. And so going back to that definition, the student ought to have some say in where the learning takes place, which is referenced in that definition. They ought to have some say in what the pace of that learning might look like and how they're going to demonstrate competency or mastery of essential learning targets, how much time it's going to take, and of course, and probably most importantly, the path, which is tied to the independent plan of study. So someone might ask, so why do we need to do this beyond what you've already said about graduation rates and those types of things? And so we wanted to have some data that we could back up this kind of an approach with for the kids who need it. And so the RAND Corporation did a study in 2015 that involved 62 schools. 32 of these schools were actually focusing on personalization efforts within the school environment. It involved 11,000 students. And the study compared peers, students in schools using personalized learning practices, and found that they're making greater progress over a 2-year period. They had greater gains in math and reading than students at more traditional schools, and schools with the greatest achievement gains reported strong implementation of student grouping strategies driven by data and responsive to student needs, provision of data to students, and including them in discussions of data and learning spaces that support personalized learning. Again, that was the RAND study, and that was more based on achievement. When you look at the effects on graduation rates in the state of Washington, there was an initiative called the College Readiness Initiative that was part of the College Spark Washington program, and it looked at 39 low-income schools that received some grants to prepare students for college and career readiness. And so those schools focused on personalization, rigorous coursework, independent plans of study, some of the things that Christy talked about in her presentation, relevance to student engagement, reflection, and feedback. And they too had greater gains in math and reading than students at more traditional schools. Probably more importantly, and aligned with the board's vision, the graduation rates were about 20% higher in initiative schools than non-initiative schools. And the number of students, going back to the rigorous coursework piece, the number of students taking advanced math in high school increased from 61% in 2008 to 79% in 2015. And for chemistry, the numbers jumped substantially as well. Now, data on personalization and its relation to achievement isn't conclusive, but it is promising. And personalization goes a long way towards student engagement, which supports learning in ways that we don't currently have the means to measure. So how do we personalize learning? Well, foundational to any kind of an effort like that is a robust and fluid individualized plan of study, which spans into post-secondary pursuits. Another way to do that is through a competency-based approach. And those kinds of approaches are allowed in regulation as previously referenced. You can also look at the flexible demonstration of mastery as it relates to progress or progression through Kansas graduation requirements. And that would allow for increased personalization and course selection later in high school. So what do you look at as far as that's concerned? Well, you can look at state assessments. Can we give a credit or multiple credits if a sophomore in high school demonstrates a level 3 or 4 performance on the state assessments? Can we say that, yeah, you've demonstrated that you have the skills to be able to navigate language arts. Let's look at your 4-year plan while you're in high school and see if there are courses that we can take in lieu of the language arts courses that might be more relevant to what you want to pursue in a post-secondary environment. We could look at ACT. We could look at the work keys. With ACT, we'd look at college readiness benchmarks that are clearly established by ACT. With the ACT work keys, of course, you have the performance levels, silver, gold, et cetera. Other examples might be the NWEA map. Districts could still develop their own local assessments. And then, of course, going back to the example that I used earlier, districts like Jared's granting credit for community-based learning, such as Boy Scouts, youth orchestras that kids are in while they're in high school, 4-H, those types of things. So in presenting this information to to broader audiences, we thought too it might be helpful to clarify what competency-based education is. So what are competencies? How are they evaluated? What role do rubrics play? And who decides the path? Historically, it's been the school district. You you have to do it this way. You're going to take a course every semester, you get credit for it, et cetera. And so we really feel like it needs to be more of a collaborative proposition. So looking at that then, a competency that we pulled out of the Navigating Change regs basically says that a successful student can apply and interpret units while modeling problems, formulas, graphs, and data to ensure a sensible outcome. So competencies are broad enough to allow for students to really pursue their passions and interest within the competency, and they're often broad enough that they encompass one or more, usually more than one standard. That is an example of what a competency might look like. And as I said, there's a lot of good go-to material in the Navigating Change document. And then the rubric that is used to evaluate whether or not the kid has met the competency is listed there as well. And of course, those levels are the Webb's depth of knowledge levels. And so in the state, we've defined a level 1 as basic, a level 2 as basically grade level, but not necessarily college and career ready. A level 3 performance would be at college and career ready, and then level 4 would be beyond that. So kind of bringing all of that together and knowing that we have the flexibility to be able to do a lot of the things that we think are important in the state of Kansas to meet the needs of all kids without blowing up the system that we currently have. We're recommending things basically in 3 different areas. Mastery, individual plans of study, and then and competency as well. So these are 3 of the recommendations related to IPS. Using the STAR rubric, create an expectation for what fidelity to a comprehensive individual plan of study should look like at minimum in every district for every student. And the minimum expectation should be reflected in the accreditation process. In addition to core and elective requirements, an IPS is included as part of the minimum graduation requirements. I don't believe that we are currently doing that, and it is certainly important that schools see the importance in it, but in making it part of the graduation requirement, we may also elevate its importance to individual students, and that is who ultimately is going to be benefiting from that. And then the possible recommendation that the IPS platform integrates into widely used student management systems. For example, we're using Naviance right now in the Auburn-Washburn School District, and the kids do their interest inventories there, and the kids do their individual plans of study within that system. But if they need to pull a transcript after they graduate, portability, the electronic portfolio that the kids can take with them after they graduate is a part of the IPS regs. So So creating a system that's integrated where the kids can pull their transcripts, I think would elevate the importance for kids and for parents of the actual IPS. So those are some recommendations that we made related to individual plans of study. Moving on to mastery recommendations related to mastery, we're recommending that KSDE establish performance levels. And this is an example, level 3 or 4 on state assessments, for example, on the assessments, and I've listed them again here for ease of reference, that would constitute the demonstration of mastery with respect to graduation requirements. And credit would be awarded based on these standards. So basically what we're recommending is that the State Department provide guidance to school districts about what performance levels would be required on these kinds of assessments to consider granting credit based on the scores. And then of course you would still have your locally developed rubrics or assessments that would go right along with that. Recommendations related to competency-based education. We recommend that a competency-based platform of some type be identified, which could easily be leveraged by districts with limited resources. Washington State used a big picture learning model, for example. Also, we're recommending that KSDE or others could develop competencies to measure the standards for all courses required for graduation, and then the associated rubrics with specific performance criteria, not in an effort to usurp local authority or autonomy, but again, in an effort to make this as easy as possible for individual districts who wanted to pursue competency-based models with some or all of their kids. It would make it a little easier. They wouldn't have to do the development work there. It would be ready for them, but they would still have the ability to be able to do that work by themselves. So in summary, we're recommending that the state board clarify and provide examples, NKSD, of flexibility as well as the criteria for personalization tools, that we create an expectation of what fidelity to a comprehensive individual plan of study looks like at minimum in every district for every student. In addition to core and elective requirements, and IPS is included as part of minimum graduation requirements. Possible recommendation of the IPS platform that would integrate with widely used management systems throughout the state. Satisfying core area graduation requirements through alternative methods of mastery or demonstrations of mastery like state assessments, competency-based models, et cetera. So I included all of those on the summary page just for your ease of reference. But that is kind of an overview of the work that we've done. And as I said, the journey has been a bit of a winding road, but we feel like the flexibility certainly exists in the system right now. And because the system is working for a lot of kids, we don't see a need to drastically change what we're doing, but to make people aware that the flexibility does exist right now, and to think more creatively about how we can meet the needs of all kids. So that is essentially an overview of the work that we've done, and I think that we'd be happy to stand for questions right now.
Great job, Ed, to you and your subcommittee. Well done. I'll turn to Jared for questions or comments from the chat box.
And I might just say that we've designated Brianna Evans as our person that's going to respond.
Are you out of breath, Ed? Jared.
Yeah, so I think we need to take a second for everybody to digest that. That was fantastic, Ed. There's a lot there, and very good. So there's no questions right now, but we can wait a minute if there are some thoughts, feedback. I am sure somebody's got the wheels are turning.
Oh, I'll start. First of all, Ed, I think that was almost, I felt like you were defending your dissertation there. That was awesome work there. And I would like to, I don't know if you shared a copy of that. I would like to digest that a little bit more if you're willing to share that presentation. I promise I won't use it and take credit for it, but really some great information, well-researched information in there as well. And I will just put in the chat, and this is for all of us. These are questions to be necessarily be answered, but for us to continue to think about these three questions as we continue to navigate these changes. And I think you addressed some of those in yours, Ed, particularly as it relates to that 12% that did get graduated. And so again, outstanding job. And I look forward to continue to dive into your part a little bit more.
Melanie, I think you own that slide deck, do you not?
I will drop a PDF here right now.
So any of you that want to drop some money in her Venmo account for a copy of that, we'll be happy to go down that road right now.
I would be happy to drop some money in Venmo for Melanie, but as you know, an old friend that we are, I can't wait to see that PDF, because I think you just gave me 37 additional duties that I have to create. So I appreciate that. Nothing's changed, Ed. Thank you.
Actually, we meant them for Dr. Fernkopf, Dr. Watson. We will share that with you as soon as Melanie has a chance.
Well, what you've done is you put a lot of meat on the plate here of what it means to be competency and mastery. And up to this point, as we've mentioned before, the opportunity to take advantage of these types of pathways for students have not necessarily been used very much. You've given us the opportunity to reevaluate that and think about new options and opportunities for students that don't really need, quite frankly, Ed, to change legislation, law, or policies. You know, that it's you've put some meat to the bones and given us a way to move forward with this, you know, across the state. Thank you. These are great recommendations.
And again, thanks to my colleagues. They've been working hard on this and have been putting up with me at least twice a week for several weeks now in preparation for this.
They'll get a special badge. You know, no money, but a special badge. Are there any questions or comments that have come forward, Jared?
Oh, that wait time's still kicking in.
Well, I would say that there's been a lot of, you've impressed a lot of people in this, and there's a lot to process here. You've given us some clear directions and added to our conversation in a way that, quite frankly, is exactly what we need. Both of you have done a great job in bringing back information from your subcommittees that is going to challenge us as we move forward, but certainly enhance opportunities for students in the future.
Hey, Jim, one thing I will add is when Peggy sends out the summary, she will include a copy of the PDF, and then of the one Christy shared with us, so the task force can have some time to kind of get the wheels turning and
of course, actually,
some of those.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, there's a lot we've already gotten today from the first two presentations. No pressure, Kelly. Yeah, this is great. As Randy said, this is going to put others to work. State board is going to be challenged, and the legislature, but more the state board, you know, and but also the challenges to people in the field to look at their roles and responsibilities for students as well. With that, how about we move to Kelly and value-added diplomas. Kelly, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim. So obviously, the subcommittee that we have is the added value or market value assets. And the charge that our subcommittee was given was to look at the need and benefit of value-added diplomas as a graduation requirement. Another way of looking at that is, how does a graduate demonstrate that they are ready for the next level? And how do they prove that? So in looking at that, we didn't have anything to pattern ourselves after and review. So, but throughout all of our subcommittee meetings, we had great and excellent and engaging conversations during our meetings. We started out looking at the Kauffman Foundation market value assets, kind of gave us a baseline to begin our conversations and looking at that. Along with that, then we also had Natalie Clark, one of the KSDE consultants, who was our featured speaker. She shared some great information about a lot of the things that some of you have talked about already. You know, she talked about the market value assets, industry recognized certifications, work-based experiences, job shadowing, apprenticeships, real-world experiences, work-based experiences, and the individual plans of study. So, and she also provided us with a wealth of examples in schools around the state who are already implementing these experiences for the students. One of the things that our subcommittee recognized very quickly was the importance of schools having the flexibility to determine what local value and market value assets could be, because it could change from areas around the state. So the flexibility is definitely needed there. We also wanted these market value assets and value-added assets to demonstrate how students and how graduates are prepared to be successful in post-secondary life and not become a barrier to achieving a graduation and achieving a diploma. So that's something we kept in mind throughout our entire subcommittee meetings. We also had Polly Vader who is a real-world learning coordinator and CTE coordinator from the Piper School District. She shared information about what they're doing and things with their CTE classes and real world experiences that were preparing their students for post-secondary life. So other discussions in our subcommittee, we discussed how the ROSE capacities, how the KSDE's vision and goals can be addressed, and by having a value added and market value assets as a graduation requirement. So then as subsequent meetings, we began to discuss and look at and creating a list of added value assets and market value assets. We went from having 3 categories down to 2 categories. And in the process of looking at that, the 2 categories, one, we believe that they could be an academic, and the other category we looked at was lumping the others in work-based or real-world experiences. We'll share those with you here in just a few minutes. Another thing that's a common theme here throughout the entire subcommittee meetings, along with the other subcommittees, we recognized the importance of having a rigorous individual plan of study for each student as they graduate high school, and how important that is to achieving their goals. Ensuring that added value and market value assets are attainable for all schools and all students is one of our other things that we really wanted to make sure. So we don't want to be, as we've mentioned before, we don't want to become a barrier to achieving a high school diploma. So whatever we have, we want it to be available for the largest 6A high school to the very smallest 1A in attaining the market value asset or the added value diplomas. So obviously we still have some work to do, as the other subcommittees have pointed out too, but we still have some special populations that we need some discussions with that. Students who may be in state custody, what do we do with dropout recovery programs as students come back that may have dropped out and want to achieve a high school diploma? How does that fit into the virtual schools, alternative schools? So we want to make sure that they're being able to meet this particular requirement of value-added diplomas. So obviously what we're looking at here is our recommendation would be students will demonstrate they are prepared for post-secondary life through academic, real-world, and work-based experiences. Students will have 2 or more value-added market value assets to meet this requirement. As the other groups have mentioned there, a student's IPS should include which market value asset or value-added asset they plan to earn or achieve, and then proof of having an IPS either through some type of senior exit interview. So the list that we were able to come up with, the working list that we have right now at this time, obviously the academic side of it, if you have an ACT composite score of 21 is our suggested score. This follows the college university requirements, or used to follow them, and meets the without need for remediation. So the score of 21 on the ACT, for example, could be an academic or a market value asset. The work keys, having a silver level equates to qualifying for 71% of the jobs in the United States, according to the ACT. Having 9+ college hours. And again, this is a good start to achieving their 12 to 15 college hours. So, and then state assessment scores kind of goes along with what some of the other subcommittees meant. If you have a 3 or 4 on the state assessments, we believe that should be able to meet a added value diploma. Having the ASVAB, some of the other flexible things here, additional things, having a senior project or senior exit interviews could be a market value or an added value diploma. An ACT, the cut score of 1080 is equivalent to the ACT score of 21. So some of the other things that we looked at also too were local district value. So being able to have the local districts decide what a value added asset could be. We haven't come up with exactly something that KSDE, some type of approval process. A couple other things might be being a Kansas Honor Scholar, or meeting the region's curriculum requirement. So those were under the academic side of things. Under the work-based and real world, some of the added value assets we thought and brainstormed there, having youth apprenticeships, entrepreneurial experiences, community service hours. Having 40 community service hours. Many districts are already having 40 hours as a requirement there, which would fit right in line with that. Students who perform client-centered projects would be a real world and work-based experience. Having work experience in certain areas obviously would be filling in line with that. Regionally vetted assets, having the districts decide what those are. Students who have industry recognized certifications. We already have those that are approved by the KSDE. Students who have achieved a seal of biliteracy. We even kind of start thinking outside the box. Other real world experiences, for example, students who have already completed basic training in the military, one of the service branches. A student who has or is a CTE pathway completer. If they've completed tech school, for example, even looking at some outside the box there, students who in the summertime or in the outside of school by meeting the Eagle Scout or Gold Scout have achieved those ranks, a certain number of years, maybe in 4-H. So some of the other areas that we talked about that we haven't all come to a complete clarification on, but one of the great indicators of future success was students who are involved in athletics and activities. We need more clarification on this, but that's one of a great indicator of future success. So we believe that could fit in there in some way. Exactly how many years that they would have to participate in that we haven't got all the nuts and bolts of that worked out. But and again, having the district decide what value added assets are, again, approved by KSDE or some type of approval process. Another one that have been kicked around as well is we know that there are some districts that have junior ROTC program, and what number of years would a student need to do that to be added value asset? Okay, so anyway, those are a lot of the different things that we have come up with as far as our subcommittee. Again, I'd like to thank all of the subcommittee members that were part of this one, and really all the information and expertise that you've lent to us is very, very important. So, we still have a few things that are to be addressed, like the other groups do as well. But outside opportunities that are examples of what could be a added value asset. So we've done a lot of work. We'll have a lot more questions, but that's where we are at this point in time. So I guess we're open for questions.
Kelly, thank you very much. Thank you and your subcommittee for your work. You've certainly brainstormed a lot of information. Think how, as I listen to your list, think how schools have changed over the years from 100 and some years ago when we first had the graduation requirements to the number of opportunities that you just delineated, and the opportunities that students have that no one ever imagined in times past. But we still have to keep thinking about the future as well. One question I have for you, Kelly, is did your subcommittee discuss or have any conversations about we have the 21 credits that the state requires at this present time, and then all 99% of the districts add additional courses. But then we also have other diplomas, the IB diploma, honors diplomas. You mentioned the regents. Did you guys talk at all about the state board having a variety of diplomas opportunities that would kind of codify some of the experiences to a specific level of diploma?
There was some discussion about that as far as how, is there a separate diploma, or do we still stick with that and then let the local districts decide through whether the kids wear cords at graduation, or if there's a sticker that they put on their diploma for some of these? That's kind of what we had kicked around, but as far as saying a separate diploma, we didn't dive into that very much.
Okay, very good. Good. Any other questions or comments? In the chat box, Jared?
Kelly, one of the questions, and I'll let you answer this. What kind of support slash added staff or systems to track these assets would be needed in the districts. And I know that's something we talked about, if you want to clarify that a little bit.
I'll try my best. So, yeah, we did look at that, and that was one of the things we're not trying to create more work for anybody, but yet there is, I know that Kelly Bielefeld shared a document with us that Chicago has some of this, some of these things in place as far as how they track that. So I know that that's going to be a good piece that we can use at our next meeting. But yes, as far as tracking that, and what technology do we use to track some of that, might be where if the schools already have in place the advisory, those type of things, where and that being part of their individual plan of study is how I see that tying back in there, which I know several others on the committee felt that would be very important and a very key thing to tracking this through the individual plans of study process.
Dr. Watson, you have a question?
So Kelly, this probably is true for Ed also. Who then decides which market value assets I achieve? Is that the student and the family, or is that the school, or some combination? For example, if the state assessment score of 3 or 4, are you saying that would be then any student that scored there, that might be something that would be included, or Lions could opt out of that and say, no, we're not going to do that? Does that make sense? So who gets the authority, the student, the family, or the school? And it's kind of true for the competency too, right? Who gets to decide whether they award competency, the student, the family, or the school, or both?
I think that should be a mutual thing between the student and the student, the parent, and the school, working again, tying that individual plan of study, what can be recognized as a value-added asset. Obviously, many of these students, especially on the academic side, should be able to meet the ones that may not meet or score as quite as high on some of those, but I think it should be tied into their individual plan of study, working between and with the students and their parents and the school.
And I'll just add to that, Randy. Well, that was a big question that we had lots of discussions on. There's things on this. There's things that are not on this list that I'm sure some districts, are using, that maybe we didn't get on this list. So I think we left that piece, and that's still a discussion that we have to have, is with the district value added asset. Like, what does that look like in Western Kansas versus the eastern part of the state, and being able to keep that equity piece in mind. And so that is definitely, that's a great question. And I think it's something that we have to dive more into.
Right. I would guess Ed would say on the academic, having an IB diploma would certainly probably fit in that category, and very few school districts offer IB, but yet, right, that would certainly count. So Kelly, are you thinking at the end of the day, whenever this is really fleshed out and solid, that there would be a minimum requirement to meet X number within the academic and X number within the work-based and real world, whether that's 1 and 1 or 2 and 2, or you had this smorgasbord, or you'd have to meet X amount in order to graduate?
Right. At this time, we think that they should have at least 2.
Corey?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part.
Sorry, in each category, or 2 total?
Just 2 total.
Okay. One of the things I was thinking about, because we have the STAR recognition that goes out to school districts, and Jim's comment about differentiated diplomas, and you could have a minimum, as Kelly just said, whether that's 1 in each category, total of 2. You also could say, hey, if you want to achieve a seal on your diploma of silver or gold or whatever, You know, if you did 3 in each of these categories, you could achieve that, and you could differentiate like that, like you kind of do honor cords. It's just something that could be done.
Well, Randy, I would say that you would need to honor the IPS and the direction we're going with that. Students who could put a plan together and receive credit for that plan, whatever that is. And then on the other side, the district or even we at the state board could delineate a path and a recognition, you know, of a different kind of diploma that says these things. But that's down in the future.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think the challenging piece with this is, and I think it kind of goes back to what Dr. Lewis put in the chat, is to make sure this is not another barrier. And that's the challenge, because I think it's very important for our kids to have these skills, but we also don't want to put another fence up to where the 12% who already struggle to get over the fence are not able to do that. And so we want to make sure that we do this, we don't make this an additional challenge. And so that's going to be the hard piece, I think, with this.
Good point. Yeah.
Just Jim and I were out at Attica late last week, and we got to see 3 small to medium-sized school districts: Anthony Harper, so the Chaparral District, Attica, and Medicine Lodge have come together on some CTE things. But we heard over and over about kids that literally had no interest in school, would have dropped out, but now because they get to spend 2 to 4 hours in these CTE fields, have re-engaged and are in school. Kind of comes back to that IPS, right? So what would they demonstrate in their IPS to validate? So good thoughts.
Yes, excellent. It makes you think a little bit about structuring it in a way that encourages, not discourages students, that it provides a smooth implementation where it's not overburdening schools and teachers, and but it gives meaning and merit to the diploma, and more importantly, to the student and to the world that they're going into. Very good. I'm of the opinion that we just keep moving on. If you need to take a personal break, that's just fine. But I'm concerned about time, and we're ready to go here. So I think we move on to our next presenter, and that's going to be, and this is important here, because as we've talked, whether it's courses added and deleted or mastering competency and evaluated diplomas, I think it's really important that we take a step forward and talking about the needs of all students on the continuum, and not to leave anyone out or to marginalize anyone. So with that in mind, Tricia Backman is representing special needs students, and in terms of diplomas and competency and value added. And Tricia, are you there?
I am.
Okay. Yeah, well, you've got the stage. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your team. It's been I got to really say, I think I've heard your presentation already once, and it's going to be great. And when we presented it, you presented it to SEAC. And it was important to the members of SEAC that the graduation task force was paying attention to all students, not just to the ones that, are going to get a diploma. How do we make the diploma viable, valuable, and appropriate for all students? So yeah, that was thank you for your work. It's really important. You're on. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Jim. I appreciate being welcomed to the table with you all, because as
Dr. Lewis had mentioned, I work with a very marginalized population. So it's the crux and the heartstrings of the whole Special Ed Advisory Council. But as well as everyone that I have met as we've been working through the Graduation Requirement Task Force. So if I go back and kind of reiterate what we've heard today, the courses added or deleted category focused on the individualized plan of study. The mastery and competency team was very focused and driven on each student, and the value addeds diploma made the point to bring out all Kansas kids have value, and we should make sure that they know that they're adding value to the market force, or whether they go on to academics post-secondary. So as I'm speaking to you guys, I'm speaking as the representative for the Special Ed Advisory Council for the state of Kansas. And I brought these 3 categories to them and presented to them what it was being discussed, so that we make sure that no kid in the state of Kansas is going to be left behind, to bring back an old term, when we start talking about adding value to the market. And so the Special Ed Advisory Council came back with 2 recommendations to our Graduation Requirement Task Force team. So the first one is that we all make sure we continue to emphasize the focus is on the I. We all have addressed the individualized plan of study, and we want to make sure that all experiences and exposures can be accessed by every student in the state of Kansas. We want to make sure that we maintain education that is always student first and student centered, focusing on the individual services for all students within the district, and that we enhance and move our students towards their future after they graduate. And using that individualized plan of study for each student is going to do that. And we believe, whether it be talking about competencies that a student can do, or making it a market value added class, or restructuring our courses so that we have STEM courses or communications courses, we believe that these experiences and exposures can be 100% supported in the individualized plan of study. All students who have an individualized plan of study, we want that to be used as the part of the transition services that drives that transition section for age 14 and older for the individualized education plan on the IEP. Make sure the individualized plan of study is put onto that document, and make sure that that helps drive the services and the classes that students are getting age 14 to 22 if needed for our students who have special needs. So the second focus is, as graduation is the goal for every student in our state and every kid in every district, we want to make sure that we don't shift to several different diplomas, but that we shift to every Kansas kid adds value to the market. Maybe we have a market value diploma, and every kid that meets the requirements gets a market value diploma, and we step up the game for all the other states by adding this diploma for our students compared to what other states are offering. They may not be focusing on the market value add, and that makes our kids more competitive in the work world when they leave, or in their academic endeavors as they venture off to post-secondary schools. We want to make sure we just keep the focus on the collective individuals as a whole, so that we can work together to get experiences and exposures. And we want to make sure that we help every kid meet requirements in an individualized way, but not necessarily delineate that they had to do an alternative diploma. Or we want to make sure that every kid's individual needs are met so that every kid can graduate, instead of leaving that 12% still kind of on the bench waiting to get in the game. Special Ed Advisory Council would like to make sure that we have students not identified with their diploma. So that's why we were really focused on making sure that we keep just one diploma and not several different levels of diploma, because then we're marginalizing people as we push them out the door of our schools into the workforce by leveling the diplomas that we offer through the state of Kansas. And since the state of Kansas does focus on every student graduating and every student having success, and we're saying that we lead the way with every student succeeding, we thought it was very important to look at one of the credits being added to our list of credits that a kid should have to graduate, being an advocacy credit. So, for example, a school may have a seminar class, and they could take that 30-minute seminar class every other day if they have block schedule or however each district is structured. And that seminar class, each teacher has a teacher advisor that they work with, and that can be a credit that's given to each student as they graduate, so that that's the time that the teacher advisor and the student have intentionally carved out to work on the individualized plan of study together. That way we're not adding more things for teachers to do, but planning that time within their schedule and structure so that the teacher and the student can become a team and make sure that the student's goals are being met. So basically, those are the recommendations that we'd had, and I open it up for any questions that you may have of us.
Well, thank you very much. You've made some good recommendations that will certainly be important to consider and make decisions about. Questions, comments? This is a quiet group today. Randy, I have a question for you. If you're there. And the question I have is, and I don't want to say this because I don't want to be off, and maybe Tricia, you know it as well. What is the graduation rate for the state of Kansas with special education students?
I can pull that up right now. I can, and Brad may know it off the top of his head. It's I want to be. We're at 88 and change overall, and I want to say, let me pull it up, Jim. I can tell you that 2 years ago we were second in the nation in graduating students with disabilities, but it does lag behind the general population. So let me get that. Let me pull it up, and I'll get that exact number for you.
I'm looking also.
I know that in the state of Kansas, we've done very well over the years, but it's still, I believe, significantly below the general population.
While you guys are looking for that, Jean made a comment that advocacy for each student could also help with the social emotional learning. And that is the big focus that we think that is everybody's going to benefit when we're meeting the individual needs of every kid to help them reach their goal and their potential for the career they want to go do. Education isn't happening to them. It is helping to benefit them. And so making sure those social emotional needs are met. One of the things, I work at the juvenile correctional facility, so we have kids who do anger replacement training, or we have kids who do thinking for a change class, and we count those for some of their social emotional skills, but we also get to count that as some of their elective credits. So I think that, Jean, you made a very good point there, and I wanted to make sure it got mentioned while they're looking those numbers up.
Advocacy programs prove to be very beneficial. They are, without a doubt, a challenge, and not everybody buys into them the same way, and they're implementing them with fidelity and over the long term. But those are the things that make a difference, especially for kids that are marginalized and don't feel included. It's real easy to work with some students, but not so easy with others. So we provide opportunities and structures that engage all students at the same level and give them the same opportunities. That's the difference. As I think about the program in the school that you're at, Tricia, that's pretty intense, in terms of supports. But these kids are the ones that are typically, I don't want to say this in a negative way, but it's going to sound awful. So often the kids said, well, glad they're gone, and we need to change that attitude, and see graduation as our, but our responsibility to all kids, and I don't want to demean the kids or the administrators or teachers, but these are the toughest kids. And if you're going to change the graduation rate, you're going to have to change how you deal with the toughest kids. And when I say toughest, I mean the toughest challenging for us to get across, the stage and get a diploma. And then the second part of that is, we have not just a graduation rate that we can be proud of, but we also have the state board, is taking on that. It's not just the graduation rate, but how are they doing 2 years later? What's their post-graduation success? And that's one that we need to look at, Randy, in light of the conversations we've had today as well. And I was wondering, when I think of incarceration, I think of recidivism. And Tricia, how are the kids doing after they leave? Are you guys doing anything on follow-up with post-secondary success or post-graduation success, I should say?
Now, I do know the Department of Correction tracks the graduation rates, and I don't have specific numbers, so I would like to get in touch. Is it Dr. Chris Fanning that maybe we could reach out to at the Department of Education for that specific number? But I do know that we have, Ed mentioned in his presentation that 59% of inmates in the federal prisons are dropouts, and 75% of the inmates in the state prisons are dropouts. Now, those are adult numbers, but I do know that we have a very high percentage of our kids that come to us that graduate with us while they're there. And those kids that graduate, the recidivism rate is way lower when we have kids who get moved out, because I have a kid who tomorrow is his leave date. Well, if his date is up and we didn't meet graduation requirements, what's the likelihood he's going to finish when he leaves? Well, this kid hasn't been in school since 5th grade. This is just an example. So what is the likelihood that he's going to be one of those 79% of the inmates in the state facility that's a dropout? Well, those are the gaps that we need to fix. And I really think that by getting kids experiences and exposures that they value and that are at the levels that they can handle, and that they experience success and they see that there's a connection between what they're doing and where they're going to go with it. We see it every day where I work. And I really think we are going to corner the market on narrowing that gap of the 12% of people in our state who aren't graduating, because kids are going to get engaged. The buy-in is huge at our facility because it is the program that they see as their way out. Education is the safety parachute that gets them out.
It keeps them out.
Yeah. And they don't go back because now they have a skill and they become gainfully employed, and they don't go back to the same things that they were doing that got them incarcerated.
So improving graduation rates and improving how we deal with those that don't have, like in juvenile justice systems, graduation opportunities. We actually improve our society, and it's all related.
Justice involved youth is one area that's very important, but it also is an area where we should look at the mental health issues, because when we're looking at the mental health needs of students and they're experiencing success and they're seeing that something that they do is being told that it has value, it's going to increase graduation rates, but it's also hopefully going to decrease community violence when we have issues outside of the school for our adult population. Maybe we can even decrease the number of people who end up going to prisons.
That would be one of the goals.
Yeah.
Yes. Any other questions, comments?
I'll circle back. Ann did drop in the chat 81.1. That is an all-time high with students with disabilities, and that is the class of 21. So even during the pandemic, we slightly went up from 80 to 81. And that gap, that may be number one in the country, but I'll have to check on that, the class of 21. But so the gap is about 7%. And while we can certainly do better, David may know this, I think I would challenge everyone, though, most states would have a gap far greater than that. And I want to tie this back in your thought process too. If most of the students in a prison or jail pipeline are not a high school educated student, I think we also need to look at how many of those have mental health needs. Trish talked about that. And if that combination doesn't speak somewhere to social emotional needs that have to also be taken care of in school along with the academic, I think it probably does. And that may be one of the things as we think about all three of your areas, how does that look within the IPS, making sure that we're meeting those needs. And I don't mean just the mental health in terms of I'm mentally healthy and I'm not psychotic. I'm talking about that I will have a plan like an IPS. I will show up on time. I will have those employability skills. So, that social emotional domain is so wide when we talk about it.
Randy, I do also want to make sure that we're not going to lose sight of, as we talk about graduation rates, our 2 years, success, after that, where are they? What are they doing? We need to continue to monitor that. And I know the data for that is very difficult to get, but it's not that we're chasing people, but it's the diploma, yes, is a key, but success isn't guaranteed. We need to still continue to monitor that. Well, any other comments or questions?
Yeah, Brad, did you have a comment that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think, when we as a state set the graduation goal at 95%, there was really two things in mind. One, that would lead the world, the country and the world. But two, there's a population of our special needs students that need that 5th, 6th, 7th, those on to 21. So we wanted to allow some space. So while Randy's right, we have a gap. Our graduation rate is based on a 4-year cohort. We don't want to force or incentivize, well, let's get kids to graduate early, especially those special needs that take that transitional on up to age 21. So there's a space for that because we want to do what's right for the kid, not just chase the number. So in that gap is space for those kids that need that additional time based off the severity of their disability. So I just want to make sure that we remembered that.
Thank you, Brad. Good to remember. Thank you. Well, next up, Jared, we need to be talking about next steps and stakeholders, and you've developed an outreach program for reaching them this spring. You want to talk about that?
Yes, let me pull it up here. I want to show everybody what we have done. So I visited with Peggy a little bit this morning, and we now do have this up on the website. So this is something that we'll talk about, and I'll meet with Randy and who we need to see how we continue to get this information out there. This is information for stakeholder input. And I'll just remind everybody I hesitate to use the word recommendations today. We want to talk about considerations. And as we continue to refine, because all these awesome things that that the subcommittees came up with, there's going to be lots of tweaks and lots of things that we potentially change before May. And so really this is up on the graduation website. So you should be able to go look at that. And it's just a quick little what the charges were, and then kind of our timeline. And so I've adjusted this a little bit. February 3rd, I think that is today. The dates are all running together. And then February through April, that's where we'll evaluate, edit, and try to come at kind of consensus is what those recommendations are before our goal of May 10th. And so the other thing, the big piece of feedback, and I will tell you, I tried to make this very simple. And I know that Randy and Jim met with some superintendents the other day, and we did start to get some feedback on this Google form. So really just the Kansas graduation requirements stakeholder feedback. As the work of the grad task force narrows, we need input from stakeholders, and that becomes a vital part of the process. So this is an opportunity to comment on the critically important yet complex component of Kansas secondary education system. And so I try to define a few things just to help people what market value assets, competency-based learning, and then made it very simple. So one thing I will say is I'm going to send this to each of you. Even if you guys want to add to this after hearing those presentations today, and we begin to compile that data, but I asked for organization, name, email, contact, and phone. I did not make these requirements in case we have people that don't want us to know who they are. I think all feedback is valuable. Identify courses that should be added to graduation requirements in Kansas. What courses should no longer be required for graduation in Kansas? Would you favor students learning by mastery, a competency-based education? And I referred to that definition above. And then why or why not would they support that? Should Kansas high school students be required to attain a market value asset prior to graduating? And then I put a few examples. Could include things such as internships, work experiences, college credit hours, and then are there other experiences in the community that could give students opportunities they need to participate? And then just a deal here for other suggestions and feedback. So my goal through this was to make it simple and an opportunity for anyone and everyone, not just educators, but parents, the business community, and everyone feel comfortable about giving feedback to this group. And so I think a goal would be to begin to send this feedback form out as either Jim, myself, Randy, whoever is speaking to groups. This is a good electronic version. And then the goal would be in March to really start looking at that information, bringing it together, and then potentially towards the end of March at our task force meeting, I'd put that together and present that to the task force. And so we could start looking in April to really dive into what that feedback looks like. That's a kind of a rough timeline. Again, we just put this on the website this morning. So it hasn't necessarily gotten a ton of feedback. You can see we had 29 responses. That was from when Jim and Randy spoke to the Superintendent's Council. I believe that was last week. So wanted to share this with you today. And I will send the link. I'm going to actually probably I'm going to have Peggy send it, or I will put it in the chat. You don't need to take time now to sit and fill it out, but I would love for you to add to that. And then we'll talk as a kind of Jim and I can talk how we want to disperse this to more and more people around the state. Are there any quick questions on this feedback form? Again, I tried to make it as general and an opportunity for anyone to give feedback, because I think that's the important piece.
Thanks for putting this together, Jared. I know this is done on Google.
It's just a Google form. Yep.
Okay, so it has ability to be translated to other languages. Okay, and are there other opportunities for individuals to provide non-electronic feedback that may not have access to technology for whatever reason?
I think that's a great question, Dr. Lewis, and some of that's going to be face to face, that when we're, whether it's myself or whether it's Jim, that are doing those presentations, you know, I'm open to more feedback if there is other opportunities for us to ask for feedback. That's what we want.
That's a great message from Dr. Lewis. We hadn't, quite frankly, I hadn't thought of that. And thank you for bringing it up. I think one of the things we should do, Jared, is make sure that districts know that they can take it to their groups, organizations, parents, you know, business community, whoever, and we could encourage them to make sure that they're reaching out to, you know, non-English speaking people and as constituents to get their input as well. Yeah, I think this we're just one of the things that Jared and I want to do is really just blast this across the state. You know, just get it out to everybody and anybody, and maybe we should think about, Jared, working with the KSDE to have some other language opportunities in that blast.
Absolutely. That's
Yes.
that's a great point.
That's a great idea. Thank you. I feel bad I didn't think of it. Thank you very much. So we have task force and committees. Yeah, great. Yeah, we're trying to reach out to the most stakeholders we can and have those conversations or give them opportunities to report back. And that's going to be real important. And Jared's just like mentioned, we've already had 29 sign up. That doesn't stop us from making some in person. I had 3 different meetings this week that were canceled because of the weather. Meeting with groups, and we'll be meeting with those representative groups. We'll reschedule those, but it doesn't mean that, and I truly would hope this would happen. I'd encourage districts, and I did talk to the superintendents about this, taking this information and utilizing it in their districts to get that to increase the reach that this survey would have. So we need to make sure we can go as far with it as possible. The 2 things that I would want to bring up at this time, you know, as we move towards where we're going and towards the end here, is one, what are we going to do next? We've had these recommendations here today. We're getting stakeholder input, and we're starting to think about considerations, as Jared calls them, but we need to form recommendations. So our next meetings that we're going to be talking and are coming up on February 17th, March 3rd, and 31st in particular. Those meetings, I felt good about the presentations we had today, but we need to follow up on those presentations. Your silence today is not what we need. What we need is input from you as members, as well as taking it out, you know, to your sphere of influence, or your faculties, or your teachers, or your work partners, and getting information so we can come back. I'm going to submit, you know, that what we do is we look at the 4 recommendations or considerations, as we want to call them, from the subcommittees today. And over the next several meetings, delve into them. I think, Jared, you and I are going to be challenged to work with the subcommittee chairs and leadership team in how we can create a dialogue. And I regret to say, in probably Zoom, but I'd love to do it online, that we can tear into these recommendations and considerations and put something together that represents what this task force wants to bring back to the State Board of Education on May 10th. You know, that's our task over the next several months. We'll continue to have individuals who represent different points of view or have other bits of information that could be valuable to our task force. But the main task and challenge to us over these next 2 months is to put together a recommendation to the state board based on the information and study that we've done, and such a way that we do what was done 117 years ago. Make a graduation requirement for a foundation of graduation moving forward into the future. So Jared, I'm open to your comments.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right, Jim. I think there's just a lot of work ahead, and I think that it's going to be important that this group, as you get those summaries, as Peggy sends those to you, just to really take some time and dive into those and give that valuable feedback before we meet again. And there's a lot to kind of process from the meeting today, but I will say I feel really good about the things that were presented, and we've done an unbelievable amount of work, and there's still a lot of work still to do. I think as we start to look at the next step.
Yeah, the next step is really important. But as I look at the reports that on the 4 different areas that we focused on today, we need to review those, each their considerations, and be prepared to come back and, quite frankly, start to structure a recommendation for the state board. We need to stick to courses added and deleted and get a recommendation up. And that's going to mean that we're going to have to break down into smaller groups to have more intimate conversations and bring those conversations forward to the larger group to come up with recommendations that we can take to the state board. So I think we just outlined our next series of tasks and responsibilities. Now I do want to go back and say how grateful I am for the hard work and the leadership of the subcommittees in bringing this information forward, their recommendations and considerations. They did a great job. And I guess I keep thinking about the finish line, and you've moved us forward. You've jettisoned the task force forward, and I feel good about the place we are right now in terms of making a recommendation in May. Our next meeting is February 17th, followed by meetings in March 3rd and 31st, and April 14th and 28th, and finally on May 10th or 11th. Probably, I can't tell you which date we're going to do the presentation, but it'll be either May 10th or 11th. And I would suggest too that as I think was put in the chat room as well, Jared and his team are going to be in front of the state board this next week. Jared, I believe you're going to be there on Wednesday?
It's going to be on Tuesday.
Tuesday, thank goodness, because I'll be there. Tuesday. Okay, thank you for correcting me. For Tuesday, and I would encourage the task force to either watch it live or as it's streamed, or go in and look at it. I'm excited about it, and I have to tell you too, Jared, the state board is excited about the presentation you're going to make. It will be the first foray into actually seeing something that is representative of the work that we've been doing. So I'm excited for that. I know the board is, and I would encourage task force members to tune in. Any last words, Jared?
I'm going to put that in the chat. That's what Peggy shared with me, and that is
okay, great
for that presentation. It's at 2:00 next on the 8th.
Great.
Really good stuff from our freshman group. But I just very much appreciate everybody's work, and I'm, again, as you look through that feedback form, if there's comments, suggestions, thoughts, please do not hesitate to reach out to me and say, look at this again, or here's some thoughts that I have. You're not going to hurt my feelings. So, and I'm thankful, Dr. Lewis, for bringing that up about other languages. That's, again, some other things that we don't want to forget as we look at barriers for people to give feedback. So thank you for bringing that up. But
Thank you, Jared.
Jim, I think
also extend my thanks to Craig and Scott for their reports today. Again, it's a challenge from what they reported to us, but it's not a challenge to shirk away from. It's that we've got some great folks in the department who are going to help us move along with whatever we decide that we want to do. To you, the subcommittees, and to the leadership teams on those subcommittees, thank you very much for your efforts, especially outside of our meetings. I know that you have all been meeting and working, and you, obviously with the presentations, the quality of presentations today, there was a lot of work and effort that went into this, and it's much appreciated because all of this is extra work for you. Thank you very much. We appreciate it very much. I am excited about the coming up or coming soon in May, our final report to the board, and that between now and then we're going to come up with some great stuff. We've got a great springboard to go from here. So thank you all very much. We'll see you on the 17th. Hopefully, maybe, you never know, in Topeka. You know, we'll have that decision out here quickly. You know, as you leave, I do want to ask the three subcommittee chairs, and Tricia and Jared and you and I, to stop and just debrief a little bit and move along. So we'll end the task force meeting today. Thank you all very much again. See you on the 17th. And who knows, maybe it'll be sunny and not windy and rainy and snowy, and we'll be in Topeka. We'll see. Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, everyone.